So I got to interview a guy named Bill McCallum yesterday, and what an awesome activist. He told some really cool stories, and I can't wait for you all to hear them because they're inspirational. Anyway, meet Bill M.
Jenna, glad to see you.
I'm so glad you just agreed to do this interview. Uh, a lot of my friends have been watching the previous interviews, and they know those people. They don't know you.
Okay, we'll introduce ourselves.
So let me switch it over to speaker view. And why don't you tell my people who you are and what you do?
Okay, I'm Bill McCallum. I'm retired, 69 years old almost. uh, Geez, what I did for most of my life, I guess in my youth, I worked in the music business for about 15 years, starting at the age of 15, doing lights and sound, and eventually managing a couple of bands, including Alice Cooper. Did roadie for a whole bunch of different people. Mash McCann was another band I handled for a bit. Bruce did, and then worked deeper into the music business. And I kind of turned my work into the music business, other than supporting myself, into doing fundraisers for worthy causes. And in those days, one of the biggies was birth control and contraception in Quebec, because I was in Montreal. I was one of Henry Morgenthaler's boys. I was one of those big, tall, 6'2" guys who walked women in and out of the clinics when people were throwing unbelievable stuff at us and beyond words and stuff. In 74, I moved out to British Columbia just in time for our first socialist government in the province. And I got involved in the union movement. And primarily health and safety, because I was just deeply disturbed that people were spraying loose asbestos off of brakes into the air, and PCBs, and there was no WMIS or any of this type of work safety in those days, and heavily involved in that. And because of my connections in youth with First Nations, my family's old. My mother's family are one of the founders. They were what's called the Anciens in Quebec. Her male antecedent came over in 1605 and helped found Quebec. You look at all the lovely Bibles, they're all like deep Christian names. They're all First Nations, probably for the first 4 or 5 generations, either First Nations or First Nations mix. My father's side, we were outlaws and brigands in Scotland. That's McCallum. And after the 1745, the Jacobite Rebellion, any male over about the age of 7 or 8 was killed on the spot, and the women and old folks and children were sent off to South Africa, Australia, wherever, indentured servitude. My part of the family was hidden, joined the Fraser Highlanders, which were recruited shortly after the Jacobite Rebellion, came over, fought in the American Revolution against the Americans, obviously. In the French Indian Wars, and they were disbanded in 1745 before the Revolution, and were given land in Fraserville. Again, the family Bibles in 1745. They married First Nations. Married actually Mohawk. The French side of the family married Cree. And when the American Revolution came along, his son fought in the American Revolution with the Americans. So growing up, I had a big introduction to First Nations culture. I met a lot of my cousins. I played lacrosse, all of these type of things with them. And I also had in my family a whole bunch of redheaded freckled Scots, women, who would have been burned at the stake as witches. They were considered hedge witches. They knew all the herbs, a whole variety of healing. They they were the nurses and the doctors for many of these communities. So I had that aspect kind of, I guess, from a Wicca standpoint or a Gaia standpoint, from a couple of really great aunts, a grandmother, and other more distant relatives. From the First Nations side, I was actually had a naming ceremony when I was 12. From the Cree side, and and I had a stroke 3 years ago. I lost 8 or 10 First Nations dialects, and I don't have my phone, and my name was actually Wolf Who Watches. I can't remember. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it in Cree. And probably when I was about in my mid-20s, I was actually camping off in the wilderness with 3 or 4 friends, tenting, and had, everybody else is asleep up around the glowing fire. And I actually had a wolf come up to the fire and lie down and sit there for another hour or 2 with me, then got up and howled and then left. So I have anchored myself basically with nature my whole life. So we'll skip back to BC. That First Nations connection in Quebec with a half dozen different First Nations. I brought a wampum belt out when I came out here and turned it over to the Nass tribe, which is up in the Stikine River, which was the first tribe in BC to actually get to have a treaty signed, and had an introduction. And I did some work with union liaison with First Nations for years. We set up, you probably heard of the Trail of Tears. We had union members with union cards that would go to different communities when they were driving through on business or whatever, introduce themselves, and they had a letter from the union that they would offer free rides. And people would know who they were. So we kind of set up an alternative bus service, or an alternative to hitchhiking, really is what it was, for whenever we were out on business. I was involved with a lot of different things, and I was the one who brought home the dead. People who were injured, dying, whatever, I was the guy the union sent to the communities. And for First Nations communities, I was the one who brought home their dying or they're dead for 25 years.
Wow.
Got to meet a lot of great grannies and aunties, most of whom have passed now, but I know their sons and their grandsons. Geez, Chief Dan George, I dated his granddaughter. So there are a lot of good connections and a lot of good feelings. Geez, and that whole spirituality blended so much with what I got basically from my Scots side, that everything has a part and place in nature. Everything is connected, and for grief, sadness, joy, I can look up at the sky and see what I need. But definitely, I have settled here on the wet coast and enjoy the salt water, and I can look out my window here and see the Coast Range Mountains and Mount Baker on a good day. I'm settling by the ocean, and it's called me home, and hope to visit a lot of the places that I got to see and introduced to by many people and share them with my new partner.
That's super cool that you get to live in such an amazing place.
I think we're all blessed. And it's sad. I look at the rivers and around here when I walked across in the 70s. You couldn't walk across a creek or a river because there were so many salmon in them now, and now they're almost all gone. I have a whole pile of arrests, no convictions, almost all of them either involved with a bunch of them with union protests in the union movement, but most involved with the environmental movement, the War of the Woods here, the pipeline protests, trying to save old growth here on Vancouver Island. The places that I had shared with me are not there for my grandkids. It's so sad to see it go. Every 3 times a week, I watch a boat load up with raw logs out here, and another 3 or 4 from around the corner where I might see them when they leave by the pulp mill, all going overseas. Everyone's 150 man years of employment that could be here. People harvesting old growth that's, I guess it's museum quality wood, musical instruments, art, to do a cathedral with. And it shouldn't be logged. You take out the trees when the wind takes them out, as the First Nations do, or for very specific ceremonial stuff. But yeah, it's breathtaking to live here, and I couldn't pick a better place.
So you kind of answered this question already, but how long have you identified your spirituality with the earth, as it were?
Probably in my youth. My brother and I were taken up to spent summers. I spent a couple of summers with my granddad alone, without my brother. My brother's 3 years younger than I am. From, I guess, about 6 years old on to about 12, where the nearest child that it wasn't at our camp was like 150 miles dirt road from somewhere. So we wandered the woods. We had a rowboat on a beaver pond, which was, I guess, about a half a mile wide and about a mile long, that we were allowed to go out in a rowboat when we learned to swim across the lake and back. You could rest on the other side. I had no problem. I'm like an otter. I'm drown proof. I've floated, done some different stuff. So I taught my brother to swim, how to rest and relax and just like let the water support you, and to eventually the two of us back and forth on the lake, because these are the days before like life jackets and this type of stuff. And then we were allowed to take the rowboat out. Well, we would chase ducks, play with ducks, get within 10 feet of a moose grazing there with its calf in the spring. I mean, we had owls, ravens that would talk to us and follow us around, partridge, real bunny rabbits, all of that type of stuff. Deer that would walk right up to you and walk right by you as long as you stayed still and wouldn't even hesitate. So pretty much my whole life.
Wow, what a privilege.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tried to share it with my kids. I moved to a place called Rossland, which just on the other side of the American border, and every opportunity I got, we took them outside, walking, hiking, mountain biking. My brother took them rock climbing. They've seen many of the wonders that were in the area, in the Kootenays and in the Cascades to the south. So yeah, it's great.
And so how do you think the earth-based spirituality has affected your life?
I think it's affected the way I see and interact with people as much as anything else. The lessons of dealing with earth and respecting earth were already there. There's a lot of lessons there about how to deal with people. First Nations culture, you don't ask direct questions. You never ask for something. They will ask you. It's the real host visitor aspect of interaction, and you're supposed to never really put somebody in a position where they have to say no, because it's embarrassing. Well, not embarrassing. It's actually almost offensive for them to have to say no. They don't want to say no. That was a great lesson for bringing up kids. That thinking about the first reaction when a child does something wrong or especially dangerous is to say no, and then having to take a breath or two and pull that back, and then like, should I really be saying no, or is this something that's like not worth the struggle for, particularly when they're really young, and carrying that through, dealing with health and welfare for so many situations that I wish I could do so much more, but you can't. Being able to accept being there sometimes with as much help as finding a solution, that there was somebody there who cared, who felt. Yeah, I think that's pretty big.
Yeah, it is a different type of philosophy to go about your world trying to not put people in a position to say no.
Yeah, it's a, I think it's an understanding that, well, I think it's a growth within me that I do want to help. I do want to do things. I do want to make a difference. I do want to change things for the better. And pulling in the reins a little bit, you can't always do it. You have to take care of yourself first. That's the most important thing always. Otherwise, you can never help anybody again. And then being more thoughtful about where you go with all that energy, all that good energy that you've got within yourself to want to do things. And they've got the philosophy of the 7 generations, that you're not making decisions for now, you're making decisions for basically 100 years and down the road. And I mean, that's critical. We can look at our environment. We just have to look out the door.
Right. Oh, that's such an important point of view too, to think about future generations. So many of the patriarchal religions just don't do that.
No, there's a big difference. Scots were matriarchal. Most Scots, even in the 15 and 1600s, were literate. If they went to church, Sunday, the kids were school. That's what they were taught to read, write, do their numbers, calculate. And I mean, beyond just reading the Bible, learning about math, learning about measurement, learning to think. First Nations, back east, not all of them were matriarchal. Particularly the Six Nations, women all had a role, and even the biggest nation in Canada was the Cree, as far as the most numbers. But the Six Nations were very important. The Iroquois Confederacy, and actually 7 if we include the ones that came up from Florida. Just I can't even remember. This not the Seneca. Can't remember. Nothing was ever done without a women's council meeting and them agreeing. They were always considered in the high councils, whether it was war or whatever. And people discount Indians as primitive. They had a thriving agricultural society. I mean, like most of the Six Nations, crap, they were in New York and on the Hudson River, many of them, and pushed all the way into Canada. Retreating from the advancement of civilization. They had the 3 sisters was a beans, squash, and corn. Crap, probably back when we were before the Roman times. Here on the West Coast, very matriarchal. There's a variety of nations on the West Coast of Vancouver Island, and a couple further up north that are on the coast that aren't part of the Coast Salish or the other interactive tribes, and the Haidas particularly, that are matriarchal. However, they are. When somebody would talk about their ancestors, they talk about their mother's line first, always. When they talk about their history. They talk about their mother's line again. And women were involved in all of the major decisions. Here in the Coast Salish, here in my area, women decide who the elders are going to be. And they decide at such a young age. They watch kids as they play and interact with other kids, and they make decisions early in grade school. A good friend of mine, Doug White, was one of the first, I think he was the second or the third First Nations person in BC to become a lawyer. And he negotiated a treaty for his band. He was a chief, and he was voted out by 3 votes just before the treaty was signed, and his mother campaigned against him because he'd stepped too far away from the band. But they had decided when he was about 8 or 10, they gave him a choice: teacher, doctor, lawyer. We need these, and we're going to work with you to be one, because we need these. And his sister runs the Childhood Development Center.
Yep, sounds about right. So, what is one of your favorite anecdotes about your life in the spiritual realm? What is one of your favorite stories of either your own path or something you have witnessed or somebody you know growing and moving through the world?
I was taken, I guess it would have been in the early 80s, to a place up the coast here in the Discovery Passage. And my First Nations friends, and sat on the beach. We sat on the beach, cold, like hours before dawn, and the Orcas came up and did a rub on the beach. That they had been watching them for a while, and this is a beach that they periodically come up on. And it's all one of these gravelly, pebbly beaches, which is so cool. When the water comes in, it goes like back and forth over the pebbles. Big kelp forest out there, out in front. And watched 4 orcas, one of them a calf, come in and roll, and they control the calf, roll, and they rub the sea lice off their bellies. It's kind of like a big scritching pad. They only come in when the tide's certain, right at I guess I call it a neat tide, slack tide, on the low tide when they come in, and then that way the tide's coming in, so if they get in a little too far, but there's more water coming in. And it was just, I was just gobsmacked. I mean, it was just like, you're just, oh my God, it's, yeah, I'm blessed. And I've actually now seen them 3 or 4 times, that it's, and seeing rafts of sea otters and all kinds of other, I fluke out. I text friends because I bump into weird things with nature, where animals are suddenly out. Like, I don't spend the time lugging around a camera. I keep it in there, and I try and bring people and share it and show it, and that type of thing, that I don't need a camera for it. It's in there forever, and it's in here.
So how long did those orcas hang out scritching on the beach?
I thought it was hours and hours, and when I looked at my watch, it was actually almost 2 hours.
Wow.
And then they're just lolling around and rolling and playing around. The mother fed the calf right off the beach, and like there's like 4 of us sitting there, and just nobody said a word for like 2 hours.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. So are you still serving the community as an activist?
I have taken a bit of a break since COVID. I still am involved to a point. We have a thing called a 710 Club here that feeds the hungry. Basically, 7 to 10 in the morning, They get real eggs, bacon, pancakes, sausages, and a bagged lunch and drinks to go out. And it's when I first came here about 11 years ago, and I'm in Nanaimo now. I was on the Lower Mainland for about a decade before that, and in the Kootenays for 15 years, and then another 15 years were winter 6 months of the year. um, Now it's changed. We changed it over, and it was just initially doing the homeless, but many of the homeless are seniors on minimal pensions. They literally can't afford to put a roof over their head. There's no SR or single residency occupancy, those crappy hotels with a shared bathroom or whatever around here. All that stuff is gone, but it doesn't freeze here, right? So it's like kind of like Seattle and Washington and that. So if you've got to live it rough, it's more survivable here, and it's more survivable than in the big city. There's better shelter and that. It extended into it, and it grew into about 2 or 3 different organizations that are basically feeding families, feeding marginal families who they get a fantastic meal, like on Saturdays and Sundays is what they were. We extended into Saturdays and Sundays. It used to only run Monday to Friday. I belonged with a group called the 100 Men in Nanaimo. Everybody kicks in $400 a year, and every 4 times a year we do a charity, and that charity gets $10,000. They give a pitch. Everybody's able to nominate somebody. And when I first got here, I found a lot of people that I knew from the civil service who retired here on the coast, and some of them union people and others. And we built up a fairy godmother and fairy godfather network. And I guess I handed it over last year to somebody younger. Now there's like 300 of them, and sometimes we can rate. Well, they bought a house for a women's shelter when we were just way too short of places for emergency shelter, and it has the capacity to hold about 5 women and possibly 2 or 3 kids each. That group probably puts $1 million a year into charities in this area. So we have a stone soup thing just in my neighborhood that basically does the typical is like, you don't know what it's in it. Depends on what we get. In the 10 years I was here, we had a food bank already, but we developed what was called Food Share. We basically went around one by one to every grocery store in the community, and don't throw out your stale dated stuff. And they are set up to sort and distribute it to the food bag, to Meals on Wheels, to different senior organizations that are doing prepared meals that they're delivering beyond the Meals on Wheels thing, or grocery bags. And now it developed to a point just before COVID, the grocery stores deliver. They actually bought them several trucks between the grocery stores and the dealerships, car dealerships. They get the plug, they get the advertising plug for it. And there isn't a single grocery store within 30 miles of me that throws out stale dated food. Not one. That they all go to Food Share and they get distributed to whoever needs them. Every single church in the community, Sikh temple, the one synagogue, every single one prepares meals and has set meals. They feed almost 10,000 people here on Thanksgiving now. So I'm still involved, but there's a lot of younger people that have taken over, and it's good. It's been good. I think I was more of an I found ways to get outside the box. We identified problems. We identified the need, and then we looked for solutions outside the box. And I've never been shy about asking corporations or people for money.
That's a great tool for your toolbox, being able to ask corporations for money. I don't think there's enough people that can do that.
We get, first of all, you'd be surprised how many people would like to help, but don't know how, other than writing a check. That if you give them another way, and maybe a way that has their name associated with it or their business associated with it, driving around the community, it's huge. Something that I wasn't involved with, that somebody came up with a problem, well, kids can't afford sports. So, okay, told them what we've done elsewhere and did some practice sessions about delivering a pitch and sent them around we went like the sports stores and the shoe stores and that. And I said, okay. And I got the Nike guys coming by and the Adidas guys coming by, like next month, they're going to have coffee with you. And yeah.
That's awesome. That's a great example. I'm so glad that you're doing that. So one of the questions that we're asking in these interviews is, of course, about mental health. People say, oh, those pagan people, they're crazy.
Crazy's good.
Yeah, that's what I think. So how has your path affected your spirituality? Good, bad, funny, indifferent?
I would say being involved with death so much. I think I was about 8 or 9. I was 9. My best grandmother got dementia, and my granddad visited her every day. This is crap. This is in the 60s, and there were no public care facilities or whatever. They were private facilities. He lost everything he had taking care of her, and she was a big, strapping 5'9", probably 180-pound Scotswoman, and I watched her waste away, and she couldn't have been 70 pounds when she died. I mean, like, she was just like something out of pictures of a concentration camp, or some just beyond belief. And I watched what it did to my grandfather, felt what it was doing to me, and watched how he healed from it. That it was like, no, she's gone. You don't remember her by dying. That doesn't do anything for them. That you got to live on. And he lived on through the rest of the family and got involved in the community and that. And the stuff that I did with the union, being around, bringing home the dead. Well, there was no hospice care. There were no support groups. Well, I would call a union meeting. Guess what? And I'd say, you're bringing your wives and your girlfriends, and we're going to have 2 meetings. You guys go to the bar afterwards, and I'm going to talk to your wives and girlfriends first afterwards. And it's like, you support the family, and then they support the widows, support the kids. And hospice care grew out of that. Support groups grew out of that. And it prepared me for the deaths close to me. Doesn't make them any easier.
Never does.
No. And I guess the 2 years leading up to COVID, I probably had 30 to 40 First Nations elders that I knew that died in that space. So it seemed that I was going from one memorial to another for almost all of that. And then COVID comes along, and probably there's been another There's been 20 people that there've been no mourning for. So we're going to have a hug day here. we're going to have, as soon as spring comes anyway, we're going to do an isolated balloons and kids face painting and just a day of joy somewhere on a big sunny park. But the plans are to have a big community hug week when we finally can, because everybody needs it. Everybody needs a big hug and a cry.
I have to agree with that. I totally agree with that. So we're getting around to the final question, which is, of course, you've been primed with the questions. I'm not going to lie to my audience here. Any advice to seekers on the path?
Well, it's inside you.
Elaborate.
You don't find joy, you don't find happiness from outside. You have to know yourself and understand yourself. Because joy is everywhere around us. Happiness is everywhere around us. I mean, you can hear the birdies sing. You can watch a puppy. You go to the park and watch people walk, or listen to kids' laughter. It's all there. It's all around us. So it's a matter of you have to be centered, balanced enough within yourself to be able to appreciate and take it in and enjoy it. And I breathe. I mean, so pretty much every culture I've been involved with, sat like in a room with 10 people with the Dalai Lama when he came to Vancouver. Was with Orca when he was at his commune, this little town. Didn't like the practice, but I liked the words and the philosophy that they all breathe. They all started off at some point with conscious breathing, and now it's natural to them to be able to find that calm, centered place where your perceptions are just so much enhanced. You allow yourself to take in everything around you.
Yeah, I like that. That is fantastic. Well, is there anything you would like to add to this interview? Anything you think the world needs to know?
One person can make a difference. One person can find another person, can find and inspire another person to do things and make a change. The Iwa River doesn't have any dams on it anymore. And I was involved with the Columbia River Project when I was raising my kids in the Kootenays. So I got to meet the Iwa and other First Nations in Washington about salmon issues. And I've got to go back and watch the salmon in the Iwa River. They've been there for 4 years now, or 5 years, and there were no salmon for over 100 years. So yeah, things can change for the better.
Yeah, we went up and saw it the second year. It was cleared. It was beautiful. It was a sight to be seen.
Yes, and they spent the time, the whole river estuary, and they're working on it every year and trying to restore it back to nature. And it's impressive.
Yeah, I think that's hopeful.
Yes.
Very hopeful. So I want to thank you again for agreeing to do this interview, Bill.
Not a problem.
We have known each other over the internet for at least a decade now. Yeah. And I'm trying to remember, we met in a tantra.
Pet life.
Wow, was it? Yeah, and it was a tantra discussion though.
Yeah, tantra. Yeah, on tantra. Yeah.
Yeah. So add that into all the other breathing stuff, because of course tantra is all about breathing.
Yes.
And, yeah.
and perception and allowing oneself to feel, accepting others' feelings.
Right. Kind of like being a human on the planet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up for tonight. I really appreciate your time and thank you so
One
much. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed that. I know I did. The story about the orca was amazing. Anyway, go ahead and subscribe, share it with your friends, and of course, keep coming back for more videos. Thanks. Bye-bye.